Welcome everybody. Thanks for attending this morning talk right after the keynote. I'm going to be talking about climbing AppSec Mountains today and how to summit. Like I said, I've got this closed captioning going, so hopefully we don't all say stuff we regret, right? I tried before you all showed up. It doesn't capture cursing. I thought that was the first thing I tried, so. I know. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Shaw. I'm the Director of Enterprise Security for Contrast Security. It covers product security, application security, security operations, and cloud security. There's some of my hobbies. I enjoy spending time with my family. I've got 2 young kids. I like doing home lab and home automation. I run a conference in Omaha, Nebraska, similar sized, probably 400 to 500 people, called Colonel Con. Love for you to check it out if you're in Omaha, Nebraska. I know it's a super popular tourist destination. So, and then I enjoy doing CTF competitions. There's my Twitter and website if you want to follow along with my work. Get in touch with me afterwards. Open up a dialogue. I'd be more than happy to. I've spent the last decade working in both development and application security, so I've been on both sides of making and breaking applications. A little bit about my inspiration for this talk. So in my previous employers, during that decade's worth of time that I talked about, I worked at large corporations, Berkshire Hathaway Insurance Company, a worldwide data provider, cable services conglomerate. These places had between 3,000 and 5,000 employees. And now I work at a smaller company with a startup culture. There was about 150 employees when I was hired, and there's 350 now. We're growing, but we pale in comparison to the numbers of my previous employers. And when I joined Contrast, there was just a lot of things I saw that I thought, wow, this is something that we can do better. And it was such a struggle at these large, bigger corporations. And so I wrote out this outline for this talk, and I started filling it in, and I realized that I had a lot of good things that I learned from working at these big organizations, these large enterprises, on their internal application security teams that I could bring and hopefully help people solve. So you might be wondering why a guy from Nebraska is coming here talking about climbing mountains. All right, but so just hang with me. I got, it's an analogy, so there's a lot to it. But first, I'd like you all to meet Ned. Okay, Ned is an application security engineer. Ned works for a large security enterprise, or just a large enterprise in general, and he's been tasked with starting their internal application security team. And he's happy that his company is prioritizing application security, right? I mean, they're saying, create this team, Ned. Now, Ned is just a representation of like all AppSec, internal AppSec people. It's not gender specific, it's just Ned, right? And it's one easy to draw figure for me on PowerPoint. More about Ned. Ned's like all good InfoSec people, Ned is on Twitter, tweeting about how he is super excited to be at LASCON today. He's done a few talks before. Ned's directives from his management, right? He has to ensure all code bases are secure, including all open source software that's utilized, ensure future development is secure. So they want to shift left with future development. His E-staff heard the term shift left, 5 years after it was first brought up, and now they think we need to do it. He also is tasked with training software developers in secure coding practices and minimizing attack vectors in external facing applications. Those are his initiatives from, his E-level staff that Ned gets day one, start a team, meet these objectives. So there's challenges right away, right? Out of the box. 2 out of 3 applications fail to pass initial tests on the OWASP top 10 and SANS 25 standards. 171 days is the average time to remediate an application vulnerability. And BSIM recommends that one software security specialist to every 73. Well, BSIM actually says that there's one software security specialist to every 73 software developers and engineers. I want to talk about that last stat there because that's insane, right? If you think about it, if I sat behind a developer and I watched them all day and just to make sure they were coding securely, I could do it. If I sat behind 2 or 3 developers, I would be able to do that. Can you imagine you as an AppSec person watching 73 developers and trying to figure out all of their code and making sure it was secure all day long, every day? That's impossible, right? Not to mention, Ned's team also has to review new library vulnerabilities, new OSS vulns. They're being released every day. Developers are just bringing in new code, and it's a really challenging task. Also, all the most common vulnerabilities for the last 5 years are still prevalent today. There's 65% of apps still have sensitive data exposures. 36% of applications still have security misconfigurations. These are all things that Jeff talked about over at the keynote, being around for, since he started the top 10. And this is the kind of thing that Ned has to face as a challenge, right? Your typical application, these numbers are changed slightly today, is about 20% custom code, all right? But here are a couple numbers that I think is really interesting. So of that custom code, 70% of it is unused, which is crazy to me. Some of that's framework specific, but the majority of OSS code is unused. And 93% of all vulnerabilities are found inside of custom code. So these are challenges, right? But Ned being a good AppSec steward, he was aware of these challenges, right? He was ready for it and prepared. He had some climbing gear to summit these mountains. He's using SAST. His company already purchased SAST. They had DAST tooling. They had a WAF. They had compliance. So he's thinking, you know what? I'm prepared for anything, right? Ned feels like I'm ready for whatever comes, right? Chipotle, whatever. So, but this is hand-me-down climbing gear, right? This is something that existed at his company already before they said, Ned, go create an application security team. So, let's pivot from Ned and let's talk a little more about the state of application security. There are hidden challenges, right? Old tooling, M&A, new products and new technologies, workplace shifts, inflexible developers. Those are all challenges that face large enterprises. And I'm going to talk a little more about each of these. Old tools. Well, here's kind of a timeline. I'm younger than my boss, so I just put dinosaurs over here. But here's some of these tools that have been developed along the way, right? You have 1999 is kind of when pen testing became common. The OWASP Top 10 came out in 2001. You have dynamic scanning, static analysis, compliance. By the way, I shamelessly stole this timeline from another team member's slides, but I think it does a really good job of talking about kind of the way that security is changed or new things and new features that have come out in security. So talking about Ned, right? Most large enterprises already had these 4 things in yellow. They've purchased them, they've already existed. I mean, in Ned's case, these existed as hand-me-down tools before Ned came aboard. So if you look, dynamic scanning, SAS tools, compliance, WAFs, they've been around for almost 20 years, right? That's about the time they became popularized. So they're a little older security tooling. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, it could be slower. Scanning and remediation can also be slower. You can miss vulnerabilities. I knew one of my SaaS products at one of these large enterprises. It took days to update. So we'd get an update, and we'd create a ticket. We'd fight over who had to do it, and then the loser would have to go and figure out, okay, well, I need to go update this, so I need to actually get this machine ID of this server I don't own, and then I need to send it over to them so that they can put it inside of their binary, and then send it back to me, and then I can do an update. And so that would take days sometimes to get all that completed. Well, in that time frame, right, you could be missing vulnerabilities. They just had an update. Maybe they just put in brand new CVEs detection. And so while you're waiting on that, you could end up missing vulnerabilities. And some of these tools, alert fatigue, that's a big one. Who in here has experienced alert fatigue? That's a majority of hands. That's insane. Alert fatigue in these old tools, you're going to get notifications on every little thing that you're going to have to figure it out. What's that mean to Ned, right? Ned has to spend hours looking over alerts to figure out which ones are valid, which ones aren't. That's time he could be spending improving the company's security posture, but instead he's working on like reading alerts and figuring out, is this a valid finding? Is this a false negative, false positive, false positive? And often they don't offer the best protection against attacks. But that's a little foreshadowing. I'll talk a little more about this later. So let's talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions. If you've never worked at a large company, this is referred to as M&A. This happens all the time at large companies, right? They go out and they buy companies, and there's strategic reasons for buying companies. I worked at a company one time that bought another company because they had printers that they wanted. I'm dead serious. Dead serious. So this is something that really happens. And when M&A happens, that really affects your internal application security team. I remember this company that they bought because they wanted their printers. They came to us and they said, we need you to do M&A on this company's application security posture. And we said, hey, let's put a stopgap on this because I broke their whole thing with a single tick mark. And their whole application is shut down. They had to restart everything from scratch because they aren't doing any input validation. And why do we want to take on this risk? And then my company said, we really need those printers. So they bought them. And we inherited these like terrible applications that we immediately had to secure. And that's the kind of thing that Ned here has to deal with too, working at this large enterprise. Now, if you look at this mountain, it's getting bigger, right? It's got old tooling, mergers and acquisitions are causing problems. I mean, every business, this is a famous quote, and I think it's attributed to Satya from Microsoft, but every business will be a software business. And that's true, right? I mean, this company bought a company because they wanted their printers, and they had software that ran these printers and chose out their customers. I mean, they had customer data on this application they could break with a single tick mark. And now we owned it. So this is, like I said, this is a natural thing, especially if your company's publicly traded. You don't know what you're inheriting. Could be terrible software, garbage servers, etc. It's a huge problem for internal application security teams. Not to mention the application spread, okay? I'm going to put both of these up. It's a little easier to talk about here. So industry-wide, let me describe these pie charts because they're a little confusing. So industry-wide, about 54% of the industry has between 1 and 200 applications, all right? And industry-wide, 23% have between 200 and 500 applications. But if you talk about large organizations, 5,000 plus employees, right? The majority of that have over 1,000 applications that they actively manage. And that's, I mean, that's everything, right? You have your internal software that, I don't know, tells you what days off you get, or, you know, managers vacation days. You have your software that that tells that tells your employees which envelopes to fold and send out. Yeah, I mean, that's everything. 1,000 applications. That's insane. And you also have to worry about new products and new technologies. Another concern, right? When you think about software, it's ever changing. Do all of can anybody name all of the logos on here? Yeah? There's a lot, right? But you've got, you know, your microservices, Kubernetes, Docker. You've got your automation, your continuous integration here. You've got your cloud environments. You've got your agile, your DevOps. Everything's changing. And you saw that timeline earlier. There's new things coming up all the time. And what's that mean for Ned, right? Well, his mountain's getting bigger again. When he thinks about, like, what's the new hotness? Is it Rust? Is it Go? Like, does he now have to plan around new languages? Are his developers really eager to try a new technology or language that will, you know, affect Ned? I mean, Ned's here and he's like, well, I'm a Java expert, I'm a PHP expert, and I'm a .NET expert. Oh shit, did I become a Go expert and a Rust expert and a Node expert, like all at the same time too? That makes it really difficult. And chances are his existing tools aren't going to necessarily cover all these new languages and new hotness, right? Because people like me, a vendor, we've got to figure out and write our products to account for these new languages and new technologies. So Ned's starting to get nervous. That mountain's looking a little bigger now, and he's thinking, this is kind of a difficult job now. I want to be clear here, though. Like, we don't want to discourage innovation from developers, but we want to encourage consideration, right? Workplace shifts. When you're talking about large corporations, happens all the time. It's hard to swallow fact, but there are still workplace shifts that happen, especially now during this COVID pandemic too. Older developers retire, move on to new roles. Layoffs. Sometimes layoffs are accompanied by like overseas hiring, right? And workplace shifts. So you don't always have the same staff, you know, that are in your building ready to help you all the time. Ned's got to spend some of his time training. And that makes him, you know, even more nervous. I mean, look at this guy. He's getting nervous now, right? He's got to train new employees. I mean, sometimes remote locations, different time zones, language barriers, and then retaining knowledge of the departed staff. Like, that's crucial. How do you make sure that you continue to meet your application security standards? And then the last little hurdle, inflexible developers. Sometimes security is seen as a blocker. This is unfortunate, right? Sometimes. Yeah. This is unfortunate, right? I mean, as an application security team, it's my goal to be a service-oriented group, right? We want to service the enterprise. We want to provide services to the enterprise where they come to us, and in order to do that, we need to get around these inflexible developers. I mean, when you have problems with development teams, that security and tech debt grow, right? Engineering fights to backlog security. Sometimes security teams report up through engineering. How backwards is that, right? When you report up through engineering that they can just sideline whatever you're doing. And findings can get swept under the rug. Right? I mean, Band-Aids, you get put into code and forgotten about. I mean, this happens. I don't need to tell you all know this happens. And that's a problem. And Ned knows it. That is a huge mountain now. He looks super nervous, and he's worried about taking on this task of starting this internal application security team at this large enterprise. It seems impossible, right? This mountain looks big, but not only is it a big mountain, he's got to push all these boulders and juggle all these things and get up the mountain. But let's talk about solutions, okay? Because Ned, he's still at base camp. All right, this is one of my favorite Mitch Hedberg jokes. So I'm going to pause for people to read it. But he's still at base camp. So he's just hanging out. All right, now I need to climb the mountain. And base camp's fun. So, but Ned, Ned wants to climb up that mountain. And so starting out, he's got a lot of energy to tackle the big things. Just to repeat, I'm not going to do this all the time, but just to repeat, he needs to ensure all current code bases are secure, ensure all future development is secure, train software developers in secure coding practices, and minimize attack vectors and external-facing applications. This was handed down to him by his E-suite right at the beginning. So let's talk about that shift left. I put this slide in, but most everyone knows what this means at this point. Shifting left means where your security scanning sits here, and shifting left means they want to bring in security earlier on in the process. So you have a WAF right here. This is usually left on a monitor mode because of all that alert fatigue that we talked about earlier. So let's, that slide might have been out of order. Let's review these challenges real quick. I just did. Old tooling, mergers and acquisitions, new product, new technologies, workplace shifts, inflexible developers. So security tooling. Can new security tooling really help with speeds? The answer is yes, right? Here's two options, IAST and RASP. If you haven't heard of these acronyms, that's Interactive Application Security Testing and Runtime Application Self-Protection. If you went to Jeff's talk yesterday about JOT, his Java Observability Toolkit, instrumenting code bases can really help with speeds and detecting vulnerabilities. Agents instrument the code bases to provide security against attacks and allow for more expedient remediation by pinpointing issues. This is kind of how they work. IAST will detect vulnerabilities with instrumentation to observe applications as they run during testing. So IAST is an agent that sits on your big monolithic app, let's say. And anything that you exercise, a route that you exercise, it will track from source to sink and determine if there are any ways that it's trying to escape a sink boundary or anything vulnerable in between. These are really popular amongst like financial institutions and health institutions because they don't really care if it takes you a few extra seconds to get your health information. You're not going to go anywhere else. You can't get it anywhere else, kind of thing. So these are really popular. This is usually run like on a developer's machine, essentially, and developers can use it to determine vulnerabilities before they ever push this code. And testing suites help with this, right? Because you're exercising all these different routes. So the better QA you have, the better your IAST is, the more routes you can test, the more vulnerabilities you can detect, and the more the more things you can fix. It's providing continuous and real-time assessment throughout the SDLC. And devs get immediate feedback with that. There's also RASP solutions, which they sit in production, and they detect and block exploitation like live, okay? And there's a difference between a WAF and a RASP tool set because it can actually differentiate between attack attempts and attacks that have actual impact. because let me give you an example here. Here is, okay, there's a CTF running by one of the sponsors today. You could name your team anything you want. Sometimes people use clever team names like or 1 equals 1, the little Bobby Tables thing. And somebody might name their team Script Alert 1, okay? Now on the back end, this might be some of the code that you see. This goes and it takes whatever team name you put in the input, and it grabs it, saves it to the state, and then it prints it out to the screen, okay? Well, this code right here is susceptible to a cross-site scripting attack, right? Because if I put in the second input and it put it out on the screen, it would pop an alert right now. I've got no sanitization. I've got no safe HTML or anything like that. I'm just taking whatever the input is, sticking it on the screen. But that first one, that won't really affect anything, right? I could print that on the screen easily. But it's a very blatant SQL injection attempt if I had a database, But in this tooling with a WAF, it would block both of those. It'd say, no, can't name your team that. No, can't do that. But with RASP solution, it's able to differentiate by tracing from the input to the sink. The sink being right here where we're printing it back onto the screen. And it says, that one's allowed, number 2 isn't. And that's a RASP solution has that advantage over a WAF solution. It protects the application runtime environment from unwanted changes and tamperings. And again, it can give you trace attempts from source to sink. Now, does it actually help you remediate faster? The answer is yes. This comes from Contrast and Baracode, but the percent of SAST remediations versus the percent of RASP remediations, within 1 month, 60% of vulnerabilities are closed if they were detected by RASP. Only 30% by SAST. But the percentage of vulnerabilities remaining, right, that are still there after 3 months, in the backlog or that become huge security issues eventually, 55% was SAST and only 32% was RASP. So again, we're still not remediating fast enough, but this definitely will help. Shifting left. Let's talk a little bit about shifting smart. This used to say shifting out, but I went to Jeff's talk yesterday, and he was wearing a shirt that said shift smart. And so I took a creep shot photo of him, and I put him in my slide deck, and I changed it from shifting out to shifting smart. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, right? If you shift smart, let's talk about that WAF and that RASP over here, okay? Remember that WAF was in monitor mode? What I'm recommending is let's put that sucker in block mode, and let's really narrow the scope, right? We're only blocking super egregious stuff that we definitely know is an attack. And we're also instrumenting with RASP right there at that level. And then we're going to shift left over here too with an IS product. And we're going to involve that in the testing, and that's going to be, we're going to have a testing suite exercise all over routes. So shifting out or shifting smart in this case, definitely helps provide newer tooling that provides better remediation and shorter remediation cycles and better findings. So let's check on Ned. That's kind of solving this old tooling. He identifies the need for new tools. He says, look, we can accomplish this whole shift left approach and get new tools at the same time and provide better results in remediations. So he's made progress, but there's still a long way to go. Let's talk about mergers and acquisitions. Ned convinces his executive staff level to get AppSec more involved in M&A discovery, okay? This is a big deal because it's hard to do, but money talks, okay? After that printer fiasco, we calculated how many hours we spent fixing the apps, and we said we spent so much time fixing these apps that you could have used that to lower the price of this company you just bought. We're buying your shit software, so we need to lower the price of your company. It can only be a positive to involve the application security team. So this is a hard conversation to have, but if you can start providing numbers and metrics, that'll help convince an E-level staff member. So I'm going to check that box. Ned did it. It's hard to do, but Ned did it in this scenario. So let's talk a little bit about new products and new technologies. Again, Ned does not want to discourage innovation. He wants to encourage consideration. So one of the things that Ned could do is create an acceptable use policy. Basically a list of things that that people can download and use. It's not going to go well if you tell developers you're taking away their admin privileges, but you can put this on compliance now and say, hey, this is something that we're going to do where these applications are approved through security and others. And the mission statement, right, of the EARB, well, so adding to the policy is easy, but it does need to be reviewed by an Enterprise Architecture Review Board, or EARB board. And their mission is to provide a strategic approach to innovate technology-based solutions and maintaining an optimal, consistent set of standardized best practices. So their goal, right, is to allow you to innovate, but just make sure that the stuff that you're bringing in meets their best practices. And so this is a good way that you can get security architecture, you can get the development architecture groups, you can get engineering managers, and then security, all in a room, and say, hey, is this a new technology that we're comfortable with? And if one person says no, then you don't do it. And then compliance enforces this, right? You have to do an asset management and determine if people are installing stuff that's outside the acceptable use policy. Let them know, hey, this isn't allowed. But the reality is, taking away admin privileges and locking down workstations makes for a bad work environment for developers. So if you can do this and say, you all agreed to this when you got hired here, now this is enforceable by compliance, it still allows them to innovate, but also requires consideration. So Ned now he's checking off some of these. He's getting a little higher on the mountain. This is Ned over here. He's working his way up the mountain. Let's talk a little bit about workplace shifts, okay? Continuing my movie posters. This happens. It's not always fun and not without much notice. There's a couple things that Ned can do. If he doesn't have advance warning, he can be prepared ahead of time. A couple things that we do. We have burn lists, which is basically a list of all things that users need to get wiped. Any account that has user credentials, it could be vast and take significant time to make this list. But the sooner that Ned can automate it, the better, right? If you have a single SSO, it's way easier than if you have a bunch of places worth credentials. And then the other thing, this is something that people don't think about that often. Default cred sweep. How many of you have staging or test environments and then have test credentials on those that all of your developers know and use, right? And unless it's locked down where they can't access that, they still remember those. You know, I still remember I worked at an auto insurance company, and the default password there was WebRater for you, and I still remember it to this day. You know, and yeah, there was like an 8 instead of a B, and the 4 was it was just a 4, and the U was capitalized. But I remember it like to this day. And I worked there 3 years, and I could still pull up the default accounts. And so, as an AppSec person, you need to be periodically testing this. Are there known test credentials? Can you do something? Can I provide SSO to my test and staging environment so that you don't have to worry about test accounts or service accounts? Can you make a service account that has creds that rotate automatically or stored in like a a Keybase type of thing. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you have to do there. And what about the new people, right? So Ned has to train all the new people. So one of the things you could do here is use a training platform that's remote and easy to distribute. Anybody can do it from home. It doesn't have to be an in-office type of thing. It's important that any new employee goes through secure software development training before they ever touch code. So I'd put a moratorium on development until you do your training. Ned also creates documentation around standards, best coding practices. One of the things that you could do here is you could stub out authentication best practices, session management, basic API requests, database connections, and more, right? And he says, these are our best practices. These are our best practices for PHP. These are our best practices for Java. These are our best practices for .NET. And then when a developer has to build a new app or gets confused about something, they can just go to the best practices and say, hey, I need to create authentication. Ned already stubbed this out for me. Copy, paste, move it over. I know it's secured, ready to go. And I know that it's best practice. We're using the right, authorization. All right, so Ned, he's working his way to the top. He's nearly there. This is one of the biggest challenges in flexible development, right? Ned's high enough to appreciate the view, but he's not comfortable yet. I pulled this photo up. I was gonna go visit this. This is in Hawaii. I was gonna go there before my wife got COVID. And we were heading to Hawaii, and I pulled this up. This is a hiking trail that she wanted to go on. And I sent her this picture. I said, are you sure? Look, there's mountains on either side of this trail right here. Cliffs. Look, it looks dangerous to me. But anyway. So how do you handle those inflexible developers? Application fighting engineering is a fight where everybody loses. If you recall the Ferris Bueller War Games movie, Matthew Broderick, I should say, not Ferris Bueller, their old quote, the only way to win is to not play the game. All right, so when you're combating with these inflexible developers, don't engage, right? There's several things that can improve the relationship. First, I mentioned earlier, application security should be housed outside of engineering. It should be under a CISO, CIO, CFO. Ideally, reporting to the board would be my if I had my druthers. It creates a separation of priorities among engineering management. And it's important to reiterate, application security is a resource, not a hindrance. After all, developers don't want to push vulnerable code. I mean, it's bad for business, right? It's bad for their careers, bad for job, security, everything if they're pushing vulnerable code. And application security engineers, I'm one of those people, I do believe that having development experience is a positive, is a plus. Because as an AppSec engineer, if I can commiserate with an actual developer at my company, it makes that bond a lot easier to develop. And make sure that you make friends with the developers. They're going to be who you spend most of your time with. Maybe visit their office, do joint outings, eat lunch with them. I work in Nebraska, but most of the engineers at Contrast are in Baltimore. And so one of the first things I did was I took 2 weeks trip to Baltimore. And I stayed there, and every day I ate lunch with all the developers, and I'd go out to their restaurants and stuff like that, and I'd hang out with them. There's a chessboard and a video game system. I'd play games with them too, because these are my peers. They're the people I'm going to be relying on and working with on a daily basis. And one of the things that Ned does, right, is Ned decides he's going to buy all the developers pizza and who attend his monthly security briefings. He's going to host open door monthly security briefings. Anyone who comes gets free food. So stuff like that can endear yourself to developers. Other things you could do. Training. Training doesn't have to be boring. You don't have to send them a 2-hour PowerPoint deck, right? Gamify your competitions. Capture the flag contests are a ton of fun, and they help them bond together because they form their own teams and they compete against other developers. They help the devs bond with you because they have to come and ask you questions. But it also establishes your expertise. Here is a tough security challenge, and I wrote it for you. And if you don't solve it, you can come to me and ask questions, and I can help you get there. But it demonstrates your expertise. Now you are the expert, right? And you could do secure coding hackathons. We did one at Contrast last week. We had 62 people sign up. 36 people got prizes technically, and then we had top 10 finishers, and it was open to all of our developers and contractors and everything. And I've heard nothing but good feedback about it. Lunch and learn sessions, Q&A, pizza, etc., joint outings. I mean, these are all things that can endear yourself to developers, because you guys should be partners, right? You shouldn't be competing. You should be cooperating. When I got a speeding ticket when I was like 20, I went to one of those stop classes where they say, like, if you go to the class, we'll erase the ticket. And in there, the guy said something that changed my driving forever. He said, hey, this isn't a competition. You're not racing other people on the road. You're cooperating with them to everyone get where you're going. And working with developers is like that, right? You guys are all cooperating to get where you're going. So Ned has summited the mountain. He's gotten to the top. He's accomplished all of his directives. Feels pretty good to be Ned. So thank you all for coming. If anybody has any questions or Q&A, I'd love to take that now.
I have one. I've found more often than not, less often than inflexible developers, it has been inflexible AppSec people.
Less often, you said?
Inflexible AppSec people I've seen much more often than inflexible developers. And I'll give an example of a bigger company with a big AppSec program. And developers would say, oh, this isn't an issue, right? Like, we found this thing, and they would walk through it, and have to painfully explain it to the AppSec team. Mm-hmm. And then the AppSec team at the end was like, you're right, it's not an issue, but you should fix it anyway so the tool doesn't alert on it.
Yeah, that's a problem too. Yeah.
That undermines every bit of credibility for the entire security program with the developers.
Yeah,
absolutely. When you can walk through that, or when you're focusing on, well, you have this checklist of things from a static analyzer, or dynamic analyzer, or a PDF report that you want them to fix, but they're like, well, this actually doesn't make sense. It's not viable in the context of how this application runs, or the user, that this is even useful. So why do you want to waste time on this? And
that kind of
I see more often that the developers are right in that context, and the AppSec people are just kind of sticking to the dogma.
Absolutely. The developers know their code better than you do. That reminds me of anybody know write Node applications? There's NPM audit script that you can run on your Node applications, which will go and check your package.json for vulnerable packages. We had somebody come up to, they were new and they ran that on a Node product, and they said, oh my gosh, look at all these vulnerabilities. And we went over and we said, well, we worked with them, but it turns out that the vulnerabilities existed only on developer dependencies, and they were never actually put into the actual product that we served. And having that good understanding of what's happening, it doesn't matter who it comes from, but that's the most important thing. And then you have to address it too. So you definitely have to be flexible as an application security team. The developers know their code and their land a lot better than you do. That's why I do think it's important that application security engineers have some sort of understanding of code, because when they go and they break that down for you, you need to understand why that doesn't work and why it's a false positive and why you need to figure out how to correct the tool and not them change something in their code because this doesn't apply. So that's a great point.
I'll touch on that a little bit more, expand that, because I fell into that same situation recently with a node-based application. the development team is adamant, not an issue, not an issue, not an issue. But then we step back and look, when you think about things like solar winds and that whole context of your supply chain being vulnerable, the lack of awareness of the development, they were laser focused. I gave them expertise on the app they were building. They did not understand that 70% is that code that they were dragging with them.
Yeah.
What else they were dragging into their environment. And I was like, well, look, that's great. But look, I see this port now open on your Jenkins server, and it's popping up every 6 hours when you do a build. And wow, I got root access on the Jenkins box.
Yeah, that's.
And look at all the credentials stored there. It's
Yeah.
just, I give both sides to it, but really knowing the who behind it, don't just accept the developer. You know, both sides of it. Don't just accept the engineer knows or the security. You really have to invest in that time doing the who you're working with.
I think that bond that I talk about, you know, where you kind of endear yourselves to each other, I think that helps that, right? You know, you have to understand if they're the expert about XYZ, but they have to understand that you're an expert at ABC, you know, and you guys have to come to some sort of understanding. And when you're able to show them, hey, I got root on your box and dumped all your creds because you're using this, that's a good way to demonstrate it to them that, hey, that is a bad thing. Supply chain is a beast. I actually am talking next week in California about supply chain at the Linux Foundation Member Summit. So there's a whole mess to go with supply chain issues.
And the scariest thing, a lot of the supply chain nodes are on the edge or on public networks. They're
Yep,
not secure
that's true.
on VPNs or networks. But I did want to take, that's why I pointed the 70% question you
Mhm.
there. The next stack, is that also referring to what's in your supply chain 70% not used, or was that referring to the actual application you're outward building?
The application that you're putting in production, 70% of anything in there that was custom code or not custom code is not even used. So.
I've been seeing a lot of cases where the supply chain drags 50% of that 70%.
Oh yeah, that's totally possible. I mean, those numbers could be just based on supply chain. When you're talking about a node application, I mean, even Maven installs a shit ton of dependencies nowadays. See, yeah, it doesn't get curse words. What, somebody over here was saying something? Sorry, I got wrapped up. Oh, okay, all right, yeah. Yep. But yeah, it drives a lot of that number certainly. But I mean, that's the code that you're putting in you're putting in your finished product. 70% of it's not even used. So you have to think about those kind of things.
What's making it really tough is trying for the AppSec side for us to try to figure out, spending, the teams don't have a lot of time. Maybe, I don't know if my situation is, you can't feel like it, because when you can't talk to vendors like yourselves, so a smaller percentage. But the amount of time I have because of the ephemeral, even though the engagements I'm on, trying to figure out, am I in a supply chain or some other code drag issue, or in the developer and getting to know the team well enough to figure that out? I don't have a lot of time. And a lot of these things, like, I then have to know, oh, this version of Angular now carries this, and all that's, there's another build process that cuts that out. But none of the tools check that. Like, they only go after the top level thing like us, not, oh, look at the build cut that actually helps you get that. It's just one more layer.
Some tools check that.
We're actually finding our customers are scanning the software we make, the entire deliverable.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about ways to have really bad sales experiences, have the sales team spend the entire engagement talking about the vulnerable open source software that you've bundled as part of the thing you deliver to them.
It's a nightmare.
Do you really want that to be the focus of the discussion, or do you want it to be about the features and quality of your product, right?
Yeah.
And the companies doing that are not it's not Jim Bob's Deli that's doing that. It's the equivalent of Ford and Marriott and Boeing and these little customers you might have they're actually doing this. And don't have that be a surprise for your sales teams. It just doesn't work well.
Yeah, I've been through that, by the way. That's not fun.
That's only going to grow with the SBOM thing, so everybody's going to have that.
I thought we decided that S-bombs weren't necessary last night in the speed debate.
Well, but it's like the other guy said, it's the recursive SBOM. It's not just what you included, it's what that drags along, and that's where we see most of the vulnerabilities.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and the challenge becomes, the Spring is a simple example.
And some, like I said, some tools check that.
Well, yeah, but the trick, right, is you look at Spring, and Spring looks great. You go out to the National Vulnerability Database, and there's nothing in it. And what's happening is just grabbing a 2-year-old version of Apache Commons IO that's riddled with problems. And how do you know whether it's being exposed or not? And do you really want to even expose your development teams to that kind of risk? Because they make some innocent change and suddenly induce a different section of the Spring code base. They're not Spring experts. We aren't Spring experts. And you're like, okay, well, is this likely to occur? Yes or no? And hey guys, can you create a version of Spring to at least this to get rid of these problems? And you can't really demonstrate that.
Yeah, I think we need more supply chain talks at the next LASCON. All right, well, I've been told we're out of time here, so thank you all.